Calling this meeting to order. This is the 118th meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration for the consideration for a study on impact of irregular crossing of Canada's southern border. And we thank you, Mr. Vaughan and Mr. MacArthur, for joining us today. This is our second meeting on this topic, and we have about an hour. We may not need the full hour in this particular session, and if our other witnesses for the second hour arrive early, we may terminate this a little bit ahead of the hour to leave a little bit more time for a larger panel. But we invite you now, Mr. Vaughan, for about 10 minutes to present your thoughts.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about situations, not just in Toronto, the riding that I happen to represent, but I'm here, as of course, in my capacity as the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing and Urban Affairs, but also the situation confronting a lot of municipalities and provinces across the country as we deal with a surge of shelter users. The situation as it relates to the province and the city of Toronto, but this is not different radically from Quebec and large cities like Montreal. Is first and foremost, we want to thank those cities for the hard work they've been doing in the last few months as we've experienced a surge of shelter users and people seeking supports, some of which has been driven, of course, by the situation at the borders, but it is also part of a larger picture of challenges facing us as a country around housing. But we want to thank those partners because we know that cities are on the front line doing the heavy lifting, and that provinces quite often are the organizations that provide immediate response as the federal programs kick in. The situation confronting Toronto is not a crisis in the refugee system. The situation facing Toronto is a housing crisis, and there has been a housing crisis in Toronto since the mid-90s. And if you take a look at the recent statistics, what has happened is, yes, there has been a surge of a particular population, but the city shelter system has been running at past 90% capacity for the last decade. And in fact, the crisis was identified in a groundbreaking report in 1999 by Anne Golden that shows that there is a significant and a dangerous trend in housing dynamics across this country, which shows that cities can no longer rely on shelter systems to provide housing. And so our government did not wait for a situation at the border to act. It did not wait for a call from the communities to respond. In our first budget, we doubled the money going for homelessness, in particular to get people out of shelters and into supportive housing and to provide more support for prevention. And we tripled the dollars going to provinces through the investment in affordable housing funds. And those investments are paying off with additional resources on the streets, and it's why the shelters in these cities haven't reached capacity. But the challenge is that we need a national housing strategy to address this in a fundamental, systematic way so that we have surge capacity in our emergency housing sector. And the challenge is to depopulate our shelters, not simply to build more and more shelters. And so the $40 billion investment in the National Housing Strategy, which is already being spent in communities from coast to coast to coast. I've been from BC to St. John to the north this year, cutting ribbons on projects, is our response to this present challenge. And we have to take a look at exactly what kind of housing we need and work with our provincial and territorial partners, as well as Indigenous governments and municipalities, to make sure that those dollars roll out as quickly as possible. In terms of the situation that is garnered the most attention, which is the situation in Toronto with regards to its shelter system. It has been a long-standing challenge in Toronto that half the people in the shelter system are children. This is as true for long-term Canadian populations and multi-generational Canadian families as it is for immigrant and refugee families. Half the children in the city shelter system since 1999 have been children. And when you take a look, and we've done site visits with the motels and the shelter system that's currently housing some of the new refugee asylum claimants and migrants and immigrants. When you go up to those centers, what you see are buildings full of children. This image and this stereotype of a single person crossing the border, a meme that we saw recently on social media, is just false. It's just not the experience of Toronto, and it's not the experience of the numbers we're seeing. And so what we need to do is figure a strategy out that houses families effectively. And so we are working very hard with the City of Toronto and other municipalities across Ontario, as well as the province of Quebec, to set up a system that triages at point of entry, whether it's a regular point of entry or a regular boarding crossing, and to move families in particular into housing and not shelters, and to support them with the dollars that are part of the federal government's investment into affordable housing and homelessness. And this is the strategy and the plan that has been put in place since day one this government took office. The issue here, as I said, and I will restate it again, is that we have a housing crisis in major cities in this country, and that's in large part because people flock to major cities when they're in housing need, because they perceive both there to be employment and housing resources in those communities. Unfortunately, at this point, Toronto, having sustained a 90% plus surge in its shelter system, is at a point now where it needs a network of support around it to redistribute some of those families and put them in places where they're going to thrive and contribute to their own lives, let alone the communities that they're in. The model we want to use in Ontario, or we thought we were on the way to using, was the model we put in place in Quebec. It's a triage system that at point of entry identifies the composition of the family, the composition of the group seeking asylum. It maps the provincial housing system across the entire province. It maps where those financial resources are and immigrant support services are, and language support for different groups because they present to the border differently. And it redistributes the pressure so that no one city carries the whole load. And in fact, the entire provincial system is kicked into place, and the federal supports that are there are added to the mix to make sure that provinces and municipalities get the supports they need, but also that the people seeking asylum get the supports that they're entitled to and are required to be provided with, so that the system effectively works. In the absence of the provincial system being available to us, and the provincial government has suggested this is uniquely a federal responsibility, in the absence of that system, which the federal government actually funds on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis through the social transfer, in the absence of that system being there, we've had to reach out to municipalities and municipal partners across the province and basically remap a system which currently is already in place, and are now working with other municipalities across Ontario to redistribute the pressure and to move people into good, strong housing communities with the right supports, and that situation is being mitigated and being worked on. But at the end of the day, quite frankly, if this country is not prepared to move children out of shelters, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of the citizenship status, if this country is not prepared to put an end to that practice of children in emergency shelters, this problem is going to persist. And the fear we have, quite frankly, as it relates to emergency housing, is that as we watch the forest fires in Northern Ontario, as we see what happened in Fort McMurray with 80,000 people being displaced very quickly, as we watch the floods in New Brunswick or the floods in Manitoba that still have yet to be addressed in terms of new permanent housing, what we know and what we are seeing is that significant, volatile, and sudden and large population displacements are the new normal. Whether they come from across the border or from inside your province or from across the border of provincial jurisdictions, the reality is that we can no longer sustain an emergency housing system at 90% capacity. It is not sustainable. And if we're going to take care of Canadians, we need to create a different kind of housing system. And if we're going to make sure we have capacity going forward into the next century, we're going to have to build a housing system that doesn't utilize emergency housing at a 90% capacity rate. It's just that simple, and I'm very proud to be part of a government which recognizes this, did it from day one taking office almost 3 years ago. As I said, doubled the amount of money going to homelessness supports across this country, tripled the provincial transfers, has sustained the social transfers to provinces, and is currently signing bilaterals province to province to province right across the country, including, I might add, already with Ontario. And so the resources are there. The system is being rebuilt. The focus on getting children, regardless of their status, out of these shelters is underway. And the plan from our perspective would be enhanced with provincial participation, but it is not the first time that a provincial government has shirked its responsibilities. In fact, if you go to the Anne Golden report from 1999 and you take a look at the recommendations that were contained in that report, which was the first significant response to homelessness in Toronto that was produced, what it talks about is provincial-federal gridlock. At that time, the provinces demanded total control of the housing sector and asked for the federal government to get out. At that time, a provincial government in Ontario said that they were responsible for housing and not the federal government. What has changed now is that now we have a provincial government which says they need federal help, and what the good news is the federal government's there to help them. But this jurisdictional gridlock is what has sustained the housing crisis in Ontario and Toronto. It has hurt other provinces just as much, and it's time for every level of government, all orders of government, to pull together and solve this problem, because if it's migrants today, it'll be people from a forest fire tomorrow, or it'll be people from a flood the day after that. We need to build a stronger housing system in this country, and that means we have to step up as a federal government. One of the reasons I'm here today is that when I was a reporter covering this issue back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I happened to come to Ottawa, and I questioned one Stephen Harper about this. And Stephen Harper's response to me was to go read the Constitution. His instructions to read the Constitution, his explicit instructions were that housing was not a federal responsibility and his government wouldn't participate. And what has made the housing crisis worse since the Anne Golden Report was the previous 10 years of government, which effectively cut supports for homelessness, cut supports for construction repairs, and eliminated the federal presence on subsidies right across this country. If we had not come through the last decade with weakened housing resources, the City of Toronto, the City of Montreal, Vancouver, and other municipalities right across this country would not be in a position to be frustrated in their response. We would have a robust system. We would have emergency housing being constructed and maintained, and instead we have exact opposite. And I'll add one last note. The very first act of the provincial government in Ontario was to eliminate $800 million in committed funds for repairs to Toronto community housing. Toronto community housing will now lose 1 unit of housing per day more than they're building. That is only going to make the situation worse. We need provincial partnership on this, and we're looking forward to Ontario stepping up, regardless of the citizenship status of children.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. We begin with Madame Mendez. Pendant 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. I think it would be interesting to highlight what you were saying, Mr. Vaughan, on Quebec's participation, the Quebec government's participation in this situation, which has become more striking perhaps since 2016. But, as you said, this is not a recent situation. However, when it comes to the Roxham Road crossings, that's a recent new issue. And a fairly significant number of people have crossed there. I did appreciate that you raised the collaboration of the government of Quebec. And if we were to extrapolate from the success of the agreement between the federal government and the Quebec government, I believe it merits repeating. Centers that collaborate with the RCMP and the CBSA have been created. There are also many NGOs that are supporting the work that's being done by both the federal and Quebec governments. There's a type of regionalization of the entire issue of asylum claimants. So I'd like to further ask your opinion on what's been done in Quebec and how we might be able to reproduce that elsewhere, particularly in Ontario, because again, it comes back to housing. Montreal is at 140%, which means that the agreement with the Quebec government is going well. Thank you. Thank you.
A good one, and it's starting to prove it has the capacity to manage the situation that is present, in particular because of the way in which the border crossing manifests itself between the United States and Quebec. The system effectively, I mean, first of all, Quebec runs its shelter system at 75% capacity, not at 90% capacity. And so when you get these irregular surges in any population of homeless individuals, there's capacity to manage and also to shift resources and model them around the population of homeless people, as opposed to running it at full capacity and not having that flexibility. And that's in large part because the province of Quebec has invested so strategically and so heavily in prevention strategies, but also in permanent housing and supportive housing, which is one of the best ways to deal with depopulating shelters. But the system that's in play in Quebec, which we think is one that would be easily replicated in Ontario because it's the same basic funding relationship between the province and the federal government and the municipalities, is a federal triage system that has access to provincial mapping of emergency, but also vacant housing across the entire province. It then models people into where the vacancies exist. It redistributes the pressure from major centres into other centres. It then steps up with additional resources around language, immigrant resettlement services, everything right down to how their hearings are managed and mapped across the entire system. This triage system takes advantage of the existing provincial social service network, but simply has it mapped in real time, so when people arrive in real time, they can be triaged into the process. The other thing that's critical about this is two things. One, the numbers haven't quite reached 2008 numbers. I don't know what Stephen Harper tweeted in 2008 to get to the numbers they got to in terms of border crossings, but something happened back in 2008, and that surge capacity was also managed with the existing provincial systems. The difference is, right now we have one province that doesn't want to participate. They don't want to use their system to help create a triage system in a significant area of pressure. But what is happening is that the system that was built in Quebec has the capacity to manage this. It does require additional federal resources. That's why the $50 million as an initial payment came forward to help with those challenges. But it allows you to map the system, migrate the people into the system in an orderly, structured way with resources attached to the different files, and then process them in an orderly way and make sure that Canadians are kept safe, but also that the migrants are kept safe and the immigrants and refugees are kept safe. That system in Quebec, we think we know we can replicate it because we're at the verge of doing it with the province of Ontario before the election. We think with cooperation we could get there. If we can't, we will continue to provide the services we need to make sure that in particular children are kept in a safe environment with services that they require. We won't be doing things like pulling refugee health care away from people and really loading onto provinces extraordinary costs, but also extraordinary risk into the healthcare system. Those sorts of approaches to immigration, regular or irregular, legal or illegal, are unacceptable. And this government, as a result, restored that funding to provinces and will continue to engage with provinces in a positive way to be proactive about this, but to create a systemic response to what is clearly an irregular surge, but nonetheless, we need to build systems to manage it.
Merci beaucoup. Et je crois que pour...
Thank you very much. Now, I think with regard to Quebec, lessons have been learned over the last 30 years. As I said earlier, well, I'm going to date myself, but I've been working intensively. I worked intensively in immigration for over 15 years, and we've seen various waves of immigration in Quebec, and we have learned from those surges. One in particular that struck me when I had started working in a resettlement organization for refugees and immigrants. When I started working there, the surge in refugees and claimants that we had in Montreal at the time was Romanians that arrived in containers. We heard absolutely horrifying stories, including people who had perished during the trip, and they arrived in a terrible state. So this placed an immediate and heavy burden on the health system, not just physical health, but also the psychosocial health system, since these individuals had suffered severe trauma. Thus, Quebec had to adjust. We're talking about the 80s and 90s, because we were experiencing this significant arrival of people. So I'm proud to see that the province has continued to maintain and even increase its capacity, and that today, yes, with the federal government, but the Quebec government has negotiated with the federal government, and I think that's the answer, to all sit down together and negotiate to find the best possible solutions. Thank you, Ms. Mendez. Unfortunately, your time is up. We will now move on with Mr. Poilievre.
And on Toronto City Council.
I spent 8 years on Toronto City, just short of 8 years on Toronto City Council. I'm just
looking at a study done by the C.D. Howe Institute, an organization formerly headed by your Liberal Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, and it shows that the increased cost of housing in Toronto due to municipal regulation and red tape is $168,000. In other words, red tape that you helped impose in the city of Toronto increases the cost of each single house by $168,000. When I found out, Mr. Vaughan, that you were here to testify about housing, I assumed that you were coming to apologize to all of the people who lost out on the opportunity to live near where the jobs and the opportunities are because of all of the red tape that you imposed in increasing the cost of housing. And so now on the issue at hand, you've said that you've said that you have this system of triaging the illegal border crossers after they enter into Canada. How much money has been spent by your government on busing illegal border crossers from one place to another?
I will defer to the department that spends those dollars to give you that answer. But in terms of in terms of the issue that you're raising,
the question is how much has been spent on busing?
Well, the issue of transportation of people from point of entry and to safe housing is not part of the ministry that I work for.
Well,
so I won't have those
you're
dollars.
responsible for the housing portfolio,
That's right.
Are you not?
That's right.
Okay, so you're saying busing them to the housing is not your responsibility. You don't have any knowledge of how much that costs.
It's not it's not a budget line that appears in the briefing notes that I've been
Okay, so you don't know because it's not in your briefing notes. Next question.
Well,
you said that earlier today we learned that there are about 800 illegal border crossers who are staying in dormitories on campuses. Students will soon return to school, and those illegal border crossers will be evicted from those dormitories, and we learned this morning they will be moved to hotels. That is the government's plan to house these illegal border crossing. How much will it cost to house the illegal border crossers in hotels in the coming year?
Well, that decision is a decision that's made by shelter services in a place like Toronto, and in particular with those individuals. But hotels
Who
are being
will pay
used.
for it?
Hotels, well, it'll be paid for by all three levels of government jointly.
And how much will it cost?
Because currently, right now, the City of Toronto's claim is that there's a $65 million price tag to the surge that's been experienced this year.
Right, but my question,
with
respect, Mr. Vaughan, our time is very limited.
Yeah.
You're responsible for housing.
Yep.
You're here to testify particularly on the illegal border crossers. Your government has made the decision to house these border crossers in hotels once they are evicted
it was a joint
from
decision
dormitories.
by all three levels of government.
How much will it cost?
The City of Toronto has said that the cost pressure they're facing is in the area of $65 million. What they haven't done is broken that down as to family and individuals. It is families that are being housed in the student shelters, in the student residences, and the use of hotels is now about 20 years. We're about 20 years down that road. Those costs have been folded into both the social service transfer, the HPS dollars, the $23 million a year that comes to the City of Toronto.
How much will it cost?
Well, the trouble is that the breakdown on that population includes all families seeking shelter in Toronto, not just immigrant, refugee,
so you don't know how much
seekers.
that will cost? You don't know how much it will cost?
This is part of the reason why we need more split out statistics, which the province has and is withholding from us, which the city has and hasn't shared with the province.
Right.
And so what we're said is that we assume and we accept that there is a federal responsibility and role here. We have a $40 billion housing program. The goal here is not simply to house people in hotels; it's to move people into proper housing.
Yes,
and
sorry,
the other
with respect, you already gave your speech. You already gave your speech.
Well, I'm answering your question.
You're not answering my question. The question was very simply, how much will it cost?
I would just remind both the witness and the member that to speak one at a time would be helpful for the interpreters.
Mr. Chair, the question was how much it would cost to house people in hotels. The witness has now said that he does not have an answer to that question.
That's not what I said. I was answering your
want
question.
to move on to another question then, if he cannot answer that one. He's indicated he does not know the cost of busing people from the border to their next location. He does not know what the cost will be to house
You're putting words in my mouth, and I refute the conclusions you've reached with your own facts.
My question then is, how many illegal border crossers have entered into this country since your government took office?
Again, you're asking deliberate questions that are outside the area of responsibility. You're asking questions that are outside. You had the Minister of Immigration coming next. I'm sure he can give you those answers. My responsibility to this is to the housing
Mr. Chair,
file.
my questions are very narrowly focused on the facts. I've asked the member who's responsible.
They aren't narrowly focused on the ministry I represent.
Speaking on
That's
behalf
the
of the largest department in the Government of Canada, Employment and Social Development. He is responsible for all the housing programs and social services that are related to the entry of illegal border crossers into this country. I have asked him, what will be the expenditure cost to put people in hotels? What will be the cost to bus them around?
As a former
I've
minister
asked
in the
him
department,
if he even knows how many illegal border crossers have arrived since since his government has taken office. And so far, he has not been able to answer a single one of these questions. So
you will know.
let me
as a
ask
former
another
minister.
question.
Well,
Maybe
let me
we'll
try and
have
answer
some
the question
lucky,
before you tell me I can't
more
answer
luck
it.
with this next question. How much to date have all levels of government had to spend on illegal border crossers since your government took office?
I'm responsible for the housing part of the equation. And on the housing part of the equation, there is a mixed model in terms of the delivery of the system. So, for example, if you're given a work permit and you're moved, and the average stay in the hotel is less than 3 months, if you move into private residence and you pay your own rent with a job, it doesn't appear as a cost on the government books. So the situation is that the City of Toronto has asked...
He doesn't know.
The City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario receive funding to deal with the population in the shelter system, and that funding currently, in terms of HPS dollars, is $23 million. We have spent $200 million a year on HPS services across the country. I can't break that down as to how much of those dollars on a day-by-day basis
I'm not
is
asking
spent
for day by day. Mr. Chair, the witness has said that he's not responsible, and I agree. Thank you.
That's not what I said.
Ms. Kwan, for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. On the housing issue, I'd like to first establish this fact. The housing crisis, as Mr. Vaughan had indicated, really began since the mid-1990s. And of course, Mr. Vaughan will know that in 1993, the federal Liberal government canceled the National Affordable Housing Program. And that was under the Liberal government, under Paul Martin, actually. And as a result of that, this country lost more than 500,000 units of affordable housing that would otherwise have been built across this country. So imagine what our country would look like today if we had had an additional 500,000 units of affordable or co-op housing, right? So hence, the housing crisis that we're in, that was in part as a result of the Liberal government's action. So that said, we do have a situation, and I would argue that the need for affordable housing is across the board. And I see it in my community in British Columbia, in Vancouver East, absolutely, but I see it across the country as well. This situation, of course, is challenged because of the asylum seekers coming over. And so Mr. Vaughan talked about a national affordable housing plan, and let me just establish this fact as well. It's good that the federal government's come back to the table. I will say that. However, 90% of the funding for that national affordable housing plan will not flow until after the next election. And that is a bit of a challenge as well, because you need the housing right now. And as you know, as we all know, if you've dealt with housing in the nonprofit sector, and I used to prior to this life, where you build housing, it takes several years at best to get a project off the ground, especially if you have rezoning involved. It takes sometimes 5 years, 6 years, 10 years to get a project off the ground. Now, so we have a housing crisis. So now I want to ask this question. Right now, the City of Toronto projects $65 million in terms of their cost to deal with the housing aspect with the asylum seekers, irregular asylum seekers. And then a large portion of which is going into hotels. Instead of actually putting that money into a hotel, which will be gone after people leave, why don't we invest that money into a permanent building? So redirect that money, purchase a building, and make that available for asylum seekers when the influx is here. And then when they're not here, you can make that available for local people in terms of a transition into permanent housing, or even regularize the refugee program, as we've seen with the Syrian refugees. When they first came, they too, many of them were put in hotels. Instead of actually doing that, get a permanent building or series of permanent buildings to which then you can house asylum
I
seekers
couldn't agree with
and
you more.
refugees coming through. So is that something then?
Well, I've been trying to persuade, in particular, NDP members of Toronto City Council to stop building shelters and start building
Mr.
housing,
Vaughn,
and I agree
Mr. Vaughn,
with you. But
so my
that is
question
the
to you
solution. I
is
agree with
this: is that something that you are advancing within your own
Absolutely.
government?
And that's
if
why the
so,
National Housing
If so,
Strategy
have
was
you
inv-
offered that solution in purchasing a permanent buildings
Yes.
for inland asylum seekers?
Yes, the National Housing Strategy accommodates that, and to correct the record, the National Housing Strategy, the tripling of the transfers to the provinces started in our first budget, so those dollars are being spent now as the 10-year program kicks in. It's actually a 12-year spending profile, and we have north of $4 billion already. The National Housing, the supports for cities who wish to purchase rather than rent hotels is part of the National Housing Strategy. They can use those dollars to purchase rather
Sorry,
than rent. But the trouble is that we
Mr.
have to
Vaughn?
move cities from the emergency response into a permanent structured systemic response. The dollars we have put on the table that are being spent as we speak are doing just that. In fact, in the city
the
of Vancouver,
$65 million,
the $90 million that was just invested in the city of Victoria effectively does that, and those dollars are spent this year.
Well, Mr. Vaughn, it would be really helpful if you actually answered the question. So on the question around the $65 million that the City of Toronto has put on the table to say they need for the inland asylum seekers, of that $65 million, how much, let me just establish this, how much is the federal government going to pay for out of that amount?
And we said we were prepared to sit down with the City of Toronto and examine exactly how to deliver the support they need. We are not walking away from that obligation.
So do you have a figure that you can offer of how much you will contribute towards that?
We have immediately transferred $11 million out of the first $50 million, and we are sitting down to review the request. We need to see the statistics, the data, to see how it's being spent, to also understand where other supports that flow through the province to the city are being spent in
All
support
right.
of this.
So let me ask you this question then. Please, I only have 7 minutes. Don't waste my time.
I didn't realize answering
Of
questions
the
wasted your
$65
time.
million, so you don't know how much is going to be directed towards that. So how much have you actually offered on the table to the provinces to purchase buildings for the purposes of asylum seekers?
As I said, the National Housing Strategy, which was tripled in size in our first year in budget, is there for just that. It's there to address pressures on the emergency housing system, to create systemic responses to underserved populations.
You
and
have a
those dollars are
situation that's
flowing
going on
immediately.
at this moment. How much of the dollars is being offered on the table to the
Provinces and cities
to
have
work with
choices to
them
make about the federal resources.
to purchase a building for the asylum seekers as
If the
opposed to
city
dumping
would-
that money
if the-
into hotels?
If the city would rather purchase buildings than rent buildings, it is their choice to make. The flexibility for program to do that is in place right now.
So how much have you offered them?
We have, as a down payment, the first $50 million, which was an initial emergency response with a commitment to sit down and fulfill it based on a per capita read of
So are
where
you
they are.
saying that the
And we're
amount that
saying
you've
those-
offered them is $11 million?
as an
and that-
initial, as a first installment with more installments
And when's
to
the
follow.
next installment coming in?
When we sit down with the province and work out a system where
When's
each
your-
municipality
have you-
is measured, because we
Do you
can't
have
just
a date
respond to one
planned for
city
your
at a
next
time.
meeting then?
I can assure you that the commitment that's being made to the mayor with all ministers involved in this file is to sit down and continue to work with
So
them to
when's
make
the
sure
next meeting planned?
You'd have to ask I'm not attending that meeting, wouldn't give you an exact date, but we have made a commitment with the mayor's office. I've been
Well,
speaking with city councils on a daily basis in the city of Toronto around the shelter system. The commitment is to sit down once we get the data, once we understand what the triage system across the province looks like, once we understand what the
Well,
redistribution
Mr.
of the
Vaughn,
pressure
you're here
points
at
are,
this
and
committee
to address
answering the
all of the
questions, but
provincial
you don't
needs
know
and
when the
all of
next
Canadian
meeting is
needs.
going to be, and you don't know
I
what
can
the
get back
plan
to you.
is.
I can get you back as to what date
Then
the
why are
next
you
meeting
even
is.
here answering the questions if you don't
Thank
know
you
what the
very
plan
much,
is?
Because we're detailing what the
Thank you,
plan
Ms.
is.
Kwan. We go to Mr. Nandasangri now. You're apparently sharing time. Would you like me to give you a signal, or are you going to handle that?
I'll handle it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Vaughn, for being here. I'm actually a bit stunned right now, Mr. Chair, of the tone that this conversation is going. My impression was that we're going to be having discussions with relevant ministries with respect to their response, and sadly, we're not extending the respect that's required of our officials. So I do want to first apologize for the tone and tenor of what's happening today. But getting back to as a MP for Toronto, for Scarborough, I know we've had several Mr. Chair, if I may just continue without interruption from the opposition, I think I'm
If you'd like to make a point of order, you may.
I want to make a point that this is a
A
point of order that I think decorum is required. And unfortunately, when I have the floor, when I'm discussing, I extended courtesy to the opposition when they were going on. I think that courtesy needs to be extended to me when I'm questioning the witness.
Thank you. I would just remind all members that we were dangerously close to me actually gaveling decorum on the last questioner. So I would just ask all members to please use appropriate parliamentary decorum. Ms. Rampol.
Mr. Chair, I have been on many occasions told to act nice and be nicer and watch my tone. And frankly, I just in defense of my female colleague here, I'm really glad that she took the tone that she did.
Point of order is not debatable. Mr. Ananda-Sangha, if you'd like to continue.
Thank you. And as a member of Parliament for Toronto, I know there's been a number of opportunities where I've met with some of the asylum seekers, as have you. Can you indicate to us the specific ask from the City of Toronto and what our federal response has been and what the other levels of government have or have not done?
So the specific response was for $65 million to deal with identified housing pressures that have emerged since last October. We have given immediately $11 million as we move towards understanding exactly what federal dollars, provincial dollars, and city dollars haven't reached the new surge. We are in touch with the city on virtually a day-to-day basis. We were at visiting the shelters last week. I was with shelter workers yesterday in a different shelter in the afternoon to talk about the surge and to make sure that subpopulations are being served. For example, the LGBTQ community is also part of this migrant surge. And we have to make sure that shelter capacity in all sectors of the shelter system are there. But we're in touch to be specific to the point that was just made. We're in touch with the city on a day-by-day basis. We don't schedule meetings. We meet and engage and make sure that the dollars and the supports are there and are flowing. We continue as well to talk to the province, and we continue as well to talk to other shelter providers and other municipalities. I was talking with a member of the Nipissing Housing Authority who has shelter space and housing space in North Bay, and making sure that the Immigration Department knew about that, as well as that we tied them into the rehousing strategy. We are working on this every single day because, quite frankly, it's intolerable that children are in a hotel in a shelter. They need to be in a home close to schools and getting ready to be supported. That's the work we're doing day by day. Does it require a 10 o'clock meeting and a telephone schedule that can be presented to a committee? No, it requires constant effort, constant attention, and constant investment in those areas. And we have assured the City of Toronto that they will not be left hanging, as they have for the last 10 years, by a government that didn't commit dollars to homelessness, didn't commit money to shelter, didn't commit money to housing. And then a final point I'd like to make is that one of the big losses in the last 10 years was the last Paul Martin budget, where Jack Layton negotiated additional housing dollars and then voted against the budget and denied close to $200 million a year to go into the housing system. All parties have failed on this file. All parties have. We all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and understand that the housing crisis, which is at the root of the issue we're dealing with in Toronto right now, is something which has emerged over the last 30 years. It starts with Brian Mulroney's housing cuts in 1988. It was not helped by the NDP at Queen's Park when they made cuts to the repair of social housing and started the capital repair backlog in housing. All parties, all politicians have contributed to this. The question is, what are we going to do to get out of it?
So what's hindering Toronto's ability or our ability as a federal government to be able to resettle or move some of the folks from Toronto, particularly those that are currently at Centennial as well as Humber, into, say, Nipissing or other areas?
My colleague from British Columbia identified it. It's hard to build housing quickly, and it's hard once you built it to make sure it's in the place where you always necessarily need it. Housing systems have to be sustained. They can't simply be sparked quickly. And that's why the investments we made before introducing the National Housing Strategy started as soon as we took office, was to get the housing sector building again. And we've had great success in some communities. We're struggling in others, Toronto being one of them. But Victoria, with a $90 million investment, with the municipality, the province, and the federal government at the table, will be at reduced homelessness to a functional zero within 2 years. When all three levels of government work together, with the federal dollars that are there, the provincial commitment that is strong right now, now in BC, and with municipalities leading and fine-tuning the process, we are starting to see great results in Calgary, in London, in Hamilton. But there are certain jurisdictions that are magnets for a whole series of housing pressures and have housing markets that are very, very hot. And in those areas, there's a stubbornness to the housing crisis. But I can assure you that if we could get the numbers down to the shelter populations that we've seen in Quebec, where you've got 75% capacity, the pressure would come off the housing system in Toronto, the resettlement in an orderly way, in particular of children, would happen, and we would all be talking about a much different thing today.
Thank you, Adam. And I'd like to pass my rest of the time to Nick Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was a bit surprised earlier at Ms. Rempel's cynicism, insinuating somehow that the asylum seekers are responsible for their need to be in hotels, or that somehow anybody wants asylum seekers to go into hotels, or somehow that previous governments aren't responsible for that core housing need. And of course, Mr. Booz, who is here from the UNHCR, reminded committee members that politicians should not be scapegoating asylum seekers for political gain by blaming them for pre-existing problems. And then, of course, Mr. Poilievre went along the same lines, again, trying to insinuate somehow tying asylum seekers to the lack of housing supports and shelters. Now, you've described already for us, some of the legacy that all parties are responsible for the housing shortage, but I would like to understand how we are working with cities like Toronto to create affordable housing to meet the needs of society, including specifically asylum seekers, both in the surge into shelters, but then also into actual housing. And then how does our national housing strategy for the country as a whole take asylum seekers and migrants into account?
In 40 seconds.
Well, it's the $40 billion investment into the country's housing system has already been parceled out in terms of the 10-year response in Ontario, and Ontario and Toronto will figure out how the bulk of those dollars are spent in the City of Toronto. But there are three main pressures in the City of Toronto that have to be addressed. The capital repair backlog, which is at about $2.6 billion right now in the City of Toronto. There is a 100,000 person wait list, which has been held steady for the last 10 years, in large part because the ingenuity of city councils, fast-tracking the approval of affordable housing projects in particular. I was on council to do that. And then additionally, we have to move with much more flexibility on the homelessness strategy to prevent homelessness and also mitigate homelessness by flowing people out. In terms of the hotels, the City of Toronto has used hotels to house families for the better part of 15 years now, closer to 20. And that system sees the average family stay for about 3.1 months. Those numbers surge when there is an influx of families, as there currently is, but that system goes back and it returns very quickly to a situation with surplus, and we're working very hard.
I need to end you there. Ms. Rempel for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, my questions will relate to the system that has been put in place to bus people who have crossed at Roxham Road and claimed asylum. This is the system that the government is referring to as the triage system. So earlier in testimony today, we've heard that the government does not want to close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. And then we've had my colleague use the word the new normal in terms of the particular situation that is happening at Roxham Road. So my question relates to the budgetary efficacy and efficacy of the government's system. How many people is the government projecting will cross at Roxham Road for the remainder of 2018 and then into 2019 that will subsequently be bused and require temporary shelter?
So I will refer those questions to the departments that manage those questions so you can get specific answers to it. And the answer and the new normal I referred to was displacement of population, not the situation at the border.
I'm assuming you are here in your capacity as parliamentary secretary because you are supposed to be talking about the efficacy of your, quote, triage system, yet you cannot tell us how many people you are expecting to have to triage in the next year. Is that correct?
Well, what we're seeing is that numbers crossing the border at that particular point has dropped now to below 40.
Well, actually, year over year,
and as a result
from June of last year
the number is fluctuating
and
thankfully getting smaller.
It's increased year over year. So the graph is going like that.
Factually, that's incorrect.
So you can't tell us how many people are going to cross the border. So how can you project how many hotel rooms will be needed?
That is the challenge of having an emergency shelter system, which is at beyond surge capacity.
you've said it's the
and so
new
the new normal
normal.
requires us not to operate shelters at 90% capacity in normal
So
times because the new normal is
spaces
displaced
are going
populations.
to be required over the next year? Because you've said that there will be more installment payments to provinces, and these installments are not part of the budgetary processes. And as parliamentarians, our role is to question government expenditures and their efficacy. So how many more hotel spots are you estimating will be required, and over what time period?
So currently, the City of Toronto's homeless population and shelter population is
Sorry,
currently.
I'll clarify. Specifically
currently
for
at six-
people crossing at Roxham Road.
I'll give you an explanation. Currently, the shelter capacity in the City of Toronto stands at about 6,400 people, half of whom are children. That number has been holding steady at about 5,000 over the last 7 years. The way to create shelter
Okay,
capacity.
I have limited
the way to
time.
create shelter
So I've
capacity in the
asked- I'm just
system is to
asking
get
for
those
stats.
people out of the shelters
I'm
into
asking
permanent
for
housing. That's the
stats
$40 billion
because we're trying
national
to-
housing
we're trying to
strategy.
figure out how much
And
money
then
is
you
going
have
to
a
be
set
needed.
budget at the City of Toronto to
So
deal with
I understand
emergency
you're trying
housing.
to talk the clock. That's fine, but we're not getting the numbers that we need here.
I was just giving you the
So
numbers.
the reality is that your government is coming out and making announcement on funding with no numbers attached to it. How many people, for how long? We can't assess, even though I might not agree with my colleague here on how, we need to be able to assess if this is the best and most compassionate way to deal with people who are entering this country at Roxham Road. Now that, as you've said, this is the new normal.
That's not what I said.
So,
what I said was
certainly,
displacement
I
of
think that
populations
if you've come to
inside
this
Canada
meeting,
is the
to
new
my
normal.
colleague's point, if you've come to this meeting without these figures, then I don't
I have the
understand why you're
figures,
here.
but you'd have to
So
stop
I would
asking the
ask-
question for me to answer
I
it.
would ask, given the amount of commentary that was colorful that you had around the provincial government, who has been in office for 2 weeks, are you planning to run for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party?
The answer to the question that I think you're trying to ask is how do we get to a system whereby the emergency housing system, which is the most expensive and least humane way to deal with any individual, let alone their immigration status, how do we move from that into a more robust
I'm
housing
trying to
program?
understand how
that
long
will
people
save
are going
cities
to be in
money,
hotels
provinces
for,
money,
and
but
how
more
many
importantly,
people
it'll
are
save
going to be
people's
in
lives.
hotels for how long, and how much it's going to
The
cost
average
the
stay in the
Canadian
hotel-
taxpayer. And to my colleague's question, if this is the best way to deal with people that are coming into the country this way, and whether or not Canada has the capacity to successfully integrate the amount of people that you have allowed to come into
The
this
premise
country
of
by
your
failing to
question
close
is that the
loophole
system will be
in the Safe
sustained
Third
as
Country
overwhelmed
Agreement.
going
We are
forward,
sitting here in
and
the
I
middle of the summer
I
for
disagree.
meetings, and you have provided no context, no answers, and no statistics for us. You are going to be coming out, and you said you're going to have more installment payments, and parliamentarians here outside of the budgetary process have less information than we did before. Your Prime Minister hired a minister who doesn't even know what his job is. Are you reporting into him?
I report to the Minister of
So what does
Social
Bill Blair
Development,
do?
the question you've
can't
asked
tell
is
us how
about
many people are
statistics.
coming in
The
here.
question
You
you've
can't
asked is
tell us
about
what his job
statistics.
is.
And
I
what
have
I'm
a point
telling
of order.
This is the second time that our colleague has wavered from the focus of the meeting. You know,
I would
Mr.
ask all
Blair's
members
job
to,
is not
stick
really
to
relevant
the
here.
agenda of the
Neither is the
meeting.
Ontario
No,
Liberal Party.
actually, because point of order, response on the point of order outside of my time. The Prime Minister has appointed a minister to be in charge of this issue. And this morning, Mr. Chair, he said, I don't know what my job is. Then we have a parliamentary secretary who's sitting here says, I don't know how many people are coming in. You'd have to ask the Department of Immigration. This morning, the minister said, the CBSA and the RCMP don't report into me. What we're seeing here is completely relevant to the issue at hand, is there's no plan from this government to manage the situation. There is no plan that parliamentarians
There
can
is
look
a
at the
plan.
adequacy of whether or not these budgetary expenses are
There is
adequate,
quite
if they're
clearly a
compassionate,
plan.
and on what projections they're being made on.
There is
That is
quite
the
clearly
data
a
we were
plan.
trying to get here today, and we've had minister after parliamentary secretary come woefully underprepared to provide this data to the committee. It is in scope, and I will continue these questions.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughan, how many people do you project will need housing after crossing Roxham Road for the next 18 months?
What we're seeing is a decline in the numbers, and therefore we believe and hope that
10,000,
the
20,000.
situation
That
has
is
peaked,
the,
which means
the
that
end of the time. We now
15,000.
go to Mr. Fergus for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Parliamentary Secretary for being here today. I'd like to continue on the same line of questions as my colleague regarding Quebec. So I'm going to follow up on what my colleague for Brussels said. Regarding our triage system, in order to work with the claimants who are at our borders. So, with that in mind, I think this gives you the chance to tell us more about what we should do and whether Quebec might be a model for other provinces, Ontario, for example, in order to better manage the system. Mr. Vaughan, could you tell us a little bit about the Quebec system, please?
Maps out the entire social service and housing network across the entire province and brings relevant stakeholders together on an ongoing basis in a proactive way to manage homelessness, shelter use, and people in core housing, but also other social dynamics. This network of a very effective network that includes medical services as well, which is a critical part of what we're dealing with, allows the pressure points to be redistributed across a provincial network with federal support and with municipal local delivery models. It is worked as a triage system, and so the question which was asked about how much does a bus cost, it depends whether they're going to Chicoutimi or whether they're going to Gatineau. And so on a case-by-case basis, what we do is we look at what the costs are that are incurred, and we support the province to mitigate those costs. But what we rely on with the province of Quebec is not the funding model. What we rely on is a systemic response that we provide resources for, that local municipalities deliver. This has proven to be exceptionally good at sustaining a population base in the shelter system below full capacity. Currently in Canada, there are 14,000 emergency shelter beds on any given night right across the country. They are not always in the right city for the right pressure point. And part of what the system has to do is try to get people to move to places where there's better housing to support them as we build out the new national housing strategy and further reduce those numbers and that dependency. That's the systemic approach which we're taking. Those are the numbers that we're dealing with, and that's the investment we've made as a federal government.
Sur cette lancée-là, Monsieur le Président,
In that same line of thought, Mr. Chair, I recall a few months ago in the spring, the Quebec government publicly complained that they hadn't reached an agreement with the federal government in order to meet the needs of this increase in costs. How long did it take the federal government to sit down with Quebec to negotiate an agreement?
And that's where the $50 million came from, in particular, as the cities and the province approached us. And so we put the first installment down, and then we said, show us the ongoing costs as this problem moves through the system and changes day to day at the border, and we will match our support to the data you provide us. The good news is Quebec's providing that data. It's allowing us to have a good conversation with providing that support and fit that support into the larger context, which was eliminating the housing crisis in this country, which will give us the surge capacity when from time to time, whether it's from a forest fire or a border issue, we need emergency housing.
est-ce que l'Ontario, le nouveau gouvernement,
With the new government in Ontario, have they made the same request to the federal government?
In negotiation to set up exactly the same system, the current government has said they're not going to have that conversation with the federal government. They've said it's a federal responsibility, and I contrast that with the former Prime Minister of Canada, who said that housing is a provincial responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, if Canadians need housing, all orders of Canadian government have to work together to deliver results. That's the result we're seeing in British Columbia, where we've got all levels of government working together to effectively build out the right kind of supportive housing that depopulates the shelter and gives municipalities the capacity they require when natural disasters inside Canada or circumstances outside Canada create a surge and a demand for emergency housing. We have got to get away from running emergency housing at 100% in this country. It is not an effective or humane or even cost-effective way to deal with these issues. And so the province of Quebec has been very, very focused on this long before there was a border issue. I mean, the homeless counts in Montreal and Quebec are significantly lower than they are in other cities. Why? Because the provincial government has made it a priority to hold emergency housing in reserve instead of using it as full-time capacity. And that surge capacity, now with federal resources, it's starting to even out and return to a more manageable set of levels. Hopefully, there isn't another significant population displacement. If a forest fire, God forbid a forest fire the size of Fort McMurray happened in the province of Quebec, there would be a whole lot of people looking for emergency housing.
Thank you,
we
Mr.
need to build
Vaughan.
for that and think about that going
For
forward.
Mr. Tilson.
merci.
What is the plan of the government to house asylum seekers in the future?
The plan is that and this has been true even under your government, was that there is emergency housing provided upon immediate point of entry, and then there is a system in place to migrate them into housing supports in the community, whether that's public or private housing. So, for example, when I was up at the shelter in Toronto, doing my due diligence and meeting with city officials on this issue just last week, what we saw were housing workers who were locating housing spots in the private and the public sector market and housing people to get them out of motels with the priority on children.
So
That system has been in place.
You're relying on the municipalities.
We are working in partnership with all orders of government and the private sector to provide housing. It's a housing system that is a shared
The
responsibility.
city of Toronto is predicting that the illegal border crossers will be taking up to 53% of the city's space by November. So I guess my question is, what does the federal government planning on doing to rectify that situation? They say that the city of Toronto says they don't have the funding.
So what they don't have, what they don't have is the housing. They
don't have the funding.
Well, it doesn't matter how much money you have if there isn't a house to rent.
Okay,
And so what we're doing is we're working with other
apples and
municipalities.
oranges, they say they can't do it, and so the question is...
And so we're sitting down with them.
Yeah, but is that all you're going to do, is to sit down?
No.
Don't you have any plan
Yeah, and
for
here's the
funding?
plan. Here's the plan. We are working with neighboring municipalities, identifying housing resources that aren't being
What
currently used.
municipalities?
And which municipalities? We've had conversations with virtually every other municipality in the GTA as far around to Hamilton and St. Catharines. We've also had conversations with North Bay and the Nipissing Housing Authority, which has 400 current shelter spaces available, and they're willing to take people.
Is that where they're going to go?
They are going to be mapped. We're going to map out a housing system over a larger geographic region than just the city of Toronto, and we're going to redistribute the problem with resources and supports to make sure that people are properly housed. Hotels and emergency shelters are no place for children, and we will not stand by and let that
children,
happen.
That's a great argument, but
It is a good argument. I'm glad you agree.
The question is, well, I just said that you've repeated it about a dozen
And I'll
times.
keep repeating it because that's where the focus should be.
The question is, what are you going to do about it? And so far,
But I
you've
just
said
told you,
nothing. So far, you've said nothing.
We have sourced new housing sites outside the city of Toronto. We've provided rent, supports, and
Who's
additional
going to pay
investment.
for that?
The federal government is stepping up and meeting its obligations, but there are also...
How much money is the federal government going to provide?
Well, you'd have to map out the exact problem.
But you say you've done that.
But what we've done is that we sit down with our partners, we get the statistical information and the data, and then we model our funding in to support the cities and
Well,
expenditures
as
that
I
are
say,
made.
the city of Toronto has said that their housing problems are
You
going
know,
to increase.
your government might cut a check for $100 million and then hope they spend it properly, but we do this in real time. We sit down, we collect data, and we meet the responsibilities of the federal government based on the
continues
data.
to pile up. The city of Toronto...
It's changing on a day-by-day basis. There are surges and it's
right.
subsiding. We have
Mayor
less than 40 ball...
Mayor Watson of Ottawa has expressed concern about asylum claimants being brought to Ottawa. My own mayor, the mayor of Orangeville, has explained concerns that about the possibility that our town could be a destination. There doesn't seem to be a lot of foresight going on by the federal government with respect to this. So does the government have a plan to deal with the housing and this part of the problem? Because I understand you're saying you're responsible for housing.
Yeah.
And will you table that plan with the government, with the committee?
So the plan is not just simply a question of how we house immigrants or refugees. The plan is how we house all Canadians and all
Will you
people
table
seeking
your
shelter.
plan with
It's
the-
the National Housing Strategy, and it's been tabled.
When was that created?
That was created in terms of the actual policies and the funding. That's what created the first budget, the second budget, and the third budget. There's a $40 billion investment over the next 10 years to build housing.
It's a long time ago, Mr. Vaughan.
There's a doubling of the...
This problem is a serious crisis with all these municipalities.
It's a serious
now.
housing crisis, and it would be a housing
but
crisis
what
with or without the
and I
immigrants and
keep
refugees, and that's the issue you need to get your head around.
You know, you're having a great time interrupting us and asking questions, sir. I'd appreciate if you let us finish asking the question before you start going on and on. So the question is, do you have a plan, and will you table it with the committee?
The National Housing Strategy, I can table that with. I can leave that and get the department to leave that.
When was the National Housing?
Last November.
What about this year?
This year, the National Housing Strategy had additional dollars put in the last budget to facilitate and accelerate the construction of rental housing right across the country. The National Housing Strategy is that plan. It addresses the issues and the pressures that the emergency housing system is delivering to the housing system as a whole, and that's our plan.
Go ahead. That's fine.
For about 3 minutes is what we have left in this round.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You mentioned, Mr. Vaughan, that the housing crisis in the City of Toronto goes back at least to the 1990s. I'm curious, with the moderate influx of asylum seekers that we have seen, how much of the housing crisis can actually be attributed to the arrival of asylum seekers, if at all?
Well, I mean, back in 1999, refugee claimants, and I'm quoting from the Ann Golden Report, about 50% of all refugees, not just refugee claimants, didn't receive any support when they had their first interview and were allowed to apply for permanent homelessness. At that point, close to 37% of the population of homeless people in Toronto were refugees and immigrants. That number in the last year has surged. It has surged across southern Ontario. London, Hamilton, different jurisdictions that I've been in contact with have also experienced the arrival of people almost overnight, sometimes by taxi, in terms of arriving looking for emergency shelter. But the housing crisis is not generated by any one single subpopulation. And to scapegoat one, or to highlight a different one, or to point fingers at certain subpopulations is to not address the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is we are not, as a country, and haven't for a generation, invested properly into the housing continuum and provided the supports and the network necessary to house people efficiently in this country, in particular children.
On that issue, given that there's a range of different possibilities that might be contributing to the housing crisis, why is it that there seems to be an obstacle vis-a-vis asylum seekers when it comes to reaching a common ground on actually making investments in housing between the federal and provincial governments in Ontario?
Because family-sized housing is the hardest housing to build quickly, source quickly, and move people into. It's the most expensive form of housing, in particular in large urban areas, and that's why the number of children in the housing, in the emergency housing system, the shelter system in Toronto, is continuing to grow, even though singles and subpopulations are starting to shrink. The challenge we have is children in this country and housing families properly.
And very quickly, just to conclude, you mentioned the answer you got when you put the question to Stephen Harper, and he said, read the Constitution. Why, in your view, is it important that the federal government is contributing to investments in housing as part of the National Housing Strategy?
The history of this country is defined by progressive federal policy around housing. You know, I make it a habit of collecting, when I'm out west in particular, the posters that showed when a family was seeking refuge from all parts of Europe over the last 100 years, the granting of the federal system would grant them land. The land had the sticks, it had the stones, and had the clay to build housing and settle and start businesses. That's how the West was settled. It was a federal policy present across the globe, attracting Canadians from around the world. It's what's built this country. The federal government since Confederation has had a stake in the federal housing policy. The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation is called Canadian for a reason. There is a responsibility for federal governments to be engaged. I agree with the member from BC. The mistakes that were made in the early 90s have devastated people in this country, have created the national housing crisis. The policies over the last 10 years made it worse. We've stepped up with a significant 10-year plan that's already spending dollars. And I can show her the news releases from British Columbia. Very good, very aggressive government on housing. We are spending those dollars and solving those problems now. The challenge we have is the emergency shelter system in certain large cities is running at full capacity, and as a result, can't handle the surge.
Mr. Vaughan.
We have to address that. We have a responsibility.
We need to end there. We're going to have a very brief suspension of the meeting so we can continue with our next. I ask the members to just take 2 minutes as we get the teleconference and the new witnesses. which continues with our study of the impact of irregular crossing of this Canada's southern border. We welcome and thank our witnesses for attending. I'm going to begin with Minister MacLeod for 7 minutes, and then we'll go to Mr. Hope, the Mayor of Chatham-Kent, on teleconference, and then Mr. Fortin, et après ça, Mr. Bolt. Madam Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. I welcome this opportunity to be appearing before this committee. My name is Lisa MacLeod, and I am the Minister responsible for immigration policy in the new Ontario government. Our new government, like most Ontarians, or all Ontarians, recognizes the value and the importance of immigration to our economic prosperity. Ontario receives more immigrants than any other province in the country. We also receive more refugees than any other province. We are proud of our ability and capacity to welcome, settle, and integrate immigrants and refugees. Ontarians are generous in welcoming and supporting the settlement and integration of immigrants and refugees, and Ontarians know that immigration enhances all of our prosperity, that immigration brings investment and opportunity to our province. Ontarians also want to know there is integrity in the immigration and refugee system. Today, I'm appearing before this committee to highlight issues of systemic integrity that have arisen as a result of federal decisions. Right now, Ontario is receiving an unprecedented number of illegal border crossers who, after crossing, are making a claim for refugee status using a loophole in the Canada-United States Third Country Agreement to claim asylum. These crossings are an entirely different matter, and it is taking advantage of Ontarians' generosity. And our position on this issue has been crystal clear since the new government formed on June the 29th. Our new government believes that managing the influx of crossers is the federal government's responsibility. The federal government must also fund the services required to support them in full. Ontario can only do so much. Since January 2016, we have received and welcomed over 36,000 refugee claimants. In addition, over 5,500 refugee claimants who made their claim in Quebec have reported moving to Ontario since January of 2017. And now communities across our province are straining to support the high number of crossers. In the City of Toronto, about 45% of shelter occupants are refugees. Our new government has stepped up to facilitate the use of approximately 800 spaces in college and university residences for shelter space during the summer. In addition, funds have been set aside for Red Cross support services in the college residential spaces which are being used as shelters. After more than a year of consistent pressure on our shelter, welfare, and legal aid systems, the federal government announced that at a future date, they will provide Ontario with $11 million. We estimate, however, that Ontario's cost to support these crossers is now approximately $200 million. That's $90 million in annualized welfare costs, $74 million in shelter costs for the City of Toronto by the year's end, $12 million and growing in shelter costs for the City of Ottawa, $3 million to the Red Cross to assist with temporary shelters, and $20 million in education costs for the children of these crossers. There has also been a strain on our legal aid system. In addition, the City of London is reporting strains within their shelter system. The problems seem to be spreading without any light at the end of the tunnel. This crisis situation is aggravated by lengthy delays in the federal government's refugee determination system. Hearings that should be completed within 60 days are now taking approximately 2 years to be held, with no improvements in sight. This is 2 years of delays that leave families in limbo. 2 years is far too long for people to await a decision. 2 years is far too long for people in Ontario to be asked to support crossers whose claims may be denied 2 to 3 years from now. The federal government must regain control of the processing timetable so that failed claimants leave more quickly and those accepted as refugees are able to move ahead and integrate into Ontario society. It is in everyone's interest to have refugee claims processed quickly and efficiently. The federal government must also address border control and policy issues, including the gap in the Canada-United States Safe Third Country Agreement that contributes to the high number of regular border crossers. In short, it is the federal government's responsibility to identify and fully fund a solution to the crisis caused by the handling of the crossers. That includes working with the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa and other affected municipalities to address the housing situation by providing full funding to the municipal shelter system and identifying federal facilities that can be used to house individuals and families currently staying in college dorms and who will be homeless after August 9th when they are expected to move out. Ontario also expects the federal government to address the costs associated with crossers, access to our welfare and legal aid systems, as well as our education system. Ontario is looking to the federal government to uphold its responsibility to actively manage the influx of border crossers and provide full financial support to cover the costs incurred. Ontarians are pro-immigration, but the current crisis has tested their patience. So I say this to the federal government: take responsibility for your choices. Stand behind them and fully fund them rather than passing the costs onto hard-pressed Ontario municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to continue now with the Mayor of Chatham-Kent, Mr. Hope. Thank you, Your Worship, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before the committee today. First of all, I just want to put it in perspective because some may not know where Chatham-Kent actually exists. So we're in the most southern part of Canada, in Ontario. And the important part is that our community of Chatham-Kent is 2,400 square kilometers. Most of that is prime agricultural land, and advanced manufacturing is one of the key areas. I appreciate the opportunity today because, you know, welcoming newcomers to Chatham-Kent is nothing that we haven't heard of before, whether it be the Underground Railroad system with Uncle Tom's Cabin located in the community of Dresden, or whether it's the immigrants that come from Europe in the 20th century to our community, whether it's the refugees under the Second World War that located themselves in our community. Chatham-Kent was also named one of the first welcoming communities in Canada for the Syrian refugees in 2016. Today, we have 75 Syrian refugees that have located in our community and are now productive members of our society. You know, in 2011, we seen the census showed us between 2011 and 2016 that our population had declined. And I don't think I'm any different than any other rural community across Ontario, where we see people transferring themselves to large urban centers and smaller communities are faced with school closures, decreasing population, less of an assessment. You know, in Chatham-Kent, we have 43 people per square kilometer, and our basic assessment that we get supports the infrastructure that we have in our community. The minister talked about a number of things, and I compliment the minister for her remarks, talking about making sure that financial responsibility and those issues that the federal government are working on are there to support communities such as ours to make sure that they have the financial resources to support. You know, the refugees are significantly important. When I look at the refugees that have been, whether it's through the Syrians or the current situation that I had the pleasure of talking with John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, about is how can we help? We're talking about people here. And in a lot of our communities will still need a labor force that is going to be required. It's important that we identify those skills that the individuals may have because they can be a major asset to our communities. A lot of our employers are looking for certain skill sets. For instance, and I know in the community of Tilbury, we had a job fair looking for over 200 vacant positions that were required for people to get employment opportunities for. You know, understanding this refugee crisis that people are talking about, but most importantly, is there enough skill sets that are there that these individuals can be transferred into full employment opportunities? And if they like being here, maybe taking up continuous residence with our community. You know, we've done a lot of work in our community. We wanted to make sure that those who come to Chatham-Kent have the support services that are there. We have received government funding to make sure that certain programs are available, making sure that translation, English as a second language, and another number of things are there to support them. We also support our community college and our elementary school system to deal with, you know, foreign students coming to our community. You know, we have schools that are being designated as closures because of student population and the decrease of population in our communities. We see this as an opportunity for our community to rally behind each other and support each other to make sure that we're bringing people and giving them gainful employment opportunities, deploying them into a community that is safe, and most importantly is to make sure that they feel welcomed in the community that they are coming to. So do we believe that, you know, the federal government has a responsibility? You are the gatekeeper. Whether I talk about refugees or asylum seekers, or whether I talk about the provincial nominee program, which I truly believe needs to be more point systems given to rural communities across Ontario, and I'm only going to speak about Ontario and not the rest of Canada, where point systems need to be so that investments are made in rural communities, where our infrastructure is already there and is sustainable to take more people on, where it'll increase our tax base as they become productive members in buying homes and living in apartments or whatever it may be, and making sure that people feel safe. The key that what I'm trying to get across to the community, and I look forward to the questions I've listened to a little bit before, we can all point fingers as who failed what on social housing. I too have a social housing waiting list. But emergency shelters should be the true definition as emergency shelters, no more than that. And we should be making sure that we have affordable housing available for people. We need to make sure that the jobs that they are seeking are gainful employment opportunities that are long-term, and that they have the opportunity to build a life. The minister was absolutely right. 2 years is a long wait for anybody to go through any process, whether it be in the provincial nominee program or whether it be as a refugee or asylum seekers. 2 years is a long time. If you want them to buy a home, to settle their roots, to make sure that their children are placed in proper schooling systems, then expediting, I wouldn't use the word expediting, making sure that due diligence is properly done in order to make sure that the residents get the timely fashion that they need in order to become a part of this Canadian society. I know in Chatham-Kent we welcome them. I know the employers in my community would welcome them, because we believe in Chatham-Kent there is a huge opportunity for them to be a part of our contributing society, to be a part of a community called Chatham-Kent, and to make sure that they can actually be a spokesperson for newcomers that may be looking at Canada as an opportunity and looking at Ontario as a place where they want to work, live, and invest, that they would be our spokesperson to say, you ought to seek out Chatham-Kent because it is a great place to work, live, and play. I'm going to stop there because I think what's really important is to work with the committee, because we are talking about humans here. We're talking about human beings with children, and we want to make sure that we as government, it doesn't matter whether we're the federal, provincial, or municipal government, we as government need to put our best foot forward to make sure that we treat people with the most humane dignity that they deserve, but most importantly is that we work with them to become members of a contributing society that I believe will shape this country to be better. We were never afraid to be welcoming people, and we need to continue to do that.
Merci beaucoup. On va continuer avec Monsieur Froid.
Thank you. And now we will move on with Mr. Fortin, the Customs and Immigration Union National President.
Members of the Standing Committee. My name is Jean-Pierre Fortin, and I am the National President of the Customs and Immigration Union. Our union has 10,000 members and represent Canada's frontline customs and immigration officers, investigations, intelligence and trade customs officers, immigration, inland enforcement, and hearing officers, as well as support staff who work at the Canada Border Services Agency. I am an officer myself with over 18 years of experience on the front line. Over the years, I have seen the government organizational structure and our workers' job evolve. The CIU has long history of involvement in border security and immigration enforcement issues on behalf of its members. We seek to offer members operational insight to identify the areas of concerns and, where possible, to improve those. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as your committee review the impact of irregular crossing of Canada's southern border. The issue is of great importance and needs an informed review. In recent years, the greatest number of irregular crossings has taken place between the state of New York and Lacolle, Quebec. I was in Lacolle yesterday, meeting with members who share their observation and recommendations with me. I can confirm that the situation in Quebec is having an impact across Canada as frontline CBSA officers are reassigned from their existing positions and land ports and airports to deal with people entering Canada between ports of entry. CBSA created a pool of volunteer officers who are prepared to deploy to Laval when needed. Yesterday, there were 6 or 7 officers from other provinces who were providing assistance. If that number climbs, as we expect it will, there will be a negative impact as it's creating pressure on those work locations they leave. This turn may cause delay from crossing the border at work location they left behind. This staffing situation is made worse by the fact that there is already severe shortage of approximately 1,100 frontline officers. The shortage is a result of the former government's 2011 Deficit Reduction Action Plan, which was intended to cut unproductive administrative and supervisory positions through attrition while maintaining operational capacities. Unfortunately, the CBSA cuts included frontline personnel at primary, secondary, export clearance, domestic intel, foreign intel, screening, and immigration enforcement. The situation continues to worsen as CBSA's attrition rate is higher than the rate at which it is hiring. Pursuant to both of the Customs Act and Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, it is illegal for a person to enter Canada between designated ports of entry. However, those same persons do have the legal right to make a refugee claim once they have entered the country. Since January 2018, the number of asylum seekers has averaged around 30 or 40 per day. Exceptionally, on some days, that number would reach 80. That is the number our officers were expected to clear yesterday at Laval. Beginning of the Easter long weekend, which was from March 30th to April 2nd, the numbers climbed to 150 to 160 per day, and the numbers remain higher than usual, between 100 and 160, until early May. In early 2018, we observed that a large number of those entering Canada illegally or irregularly were not persons whose temporary protection status in the U.S. was facing revocation. Rather, they were mainly from Nigeria, having lawfully entered the USA through a visa from express purpose entering Canada between ports of entry. For the last 2 months, the numbers have stabilized at approximately 40 per day. We believe the drop is likely due to Canadian government's intervention. The U.S. is no longer issuing visa to Nigerian nationals who merely wish to transit through U.S. in order to enter Canada. It is important that appropriate screening takes place wherever visas are issued, and I would urge the committee to confirm with the government that appropriate steps have been taken in that regards. While Nigerian phenomenon, as unexpected as these asylum seekers were not facing revocation of TPS in U.S., there are now well over 200,000 individuals whom do have TPS and whom are expected they will be required to leave the U.S. in 2019. As stated earlier, those crossing the border between ports of entry have legal rights to make refugee claims once they have entered the country. If the interviewing officer concludes the person making a refugee claim is inadmissible, the process is suspended until that issue is resolved. Although we welcome asylum seekers to our country, we also need to ensure that this is not being done to the detriment of the security. Last month, CBSA issued an operational bulletin which direct all frontline officers, including those dealing with the situation in Quebec, to restrict their querying of the U.S. National Crime Information Center database, which is equivalent to our Canadian Police Information Center database. CBSA informed us that the directive came from United States. I can tell you that this directive raised significant concern to our members. They are reiterated their concerns to me yesterday when I was in Lacal, and I would recommend that the committee seeks an explanation from this directive issuance from the CBSA president. The CIU has always asked that all officers' mobility will be increased so that they are able to monitor activity in between ports of entry. This can be done in partnership with the RCMP. The government...
I just need to ask you to draw to a close.
Okay. The government has just appointed a new minister from the Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction. While this exact mandate is unclear, jointly improving our mobility enforcement capacity between ports of entry should be a priority. I want to thank the committee for having me here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bolt for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Just a brief bit of my background. I was, before I got involved in immigration, I was a commercial banker in Canada and the United Kingdom. I began my involvement with immigration as the manager and founder of the Provincial Nominee Program in Manitoba for the business side. And I later became Assistant Deputy Minister of Immigration in Saskatchewan. I started my own immigration company in 2008. And I would also like to say that my family came as refugees in 1929, escaping the Soviet Union. As the levels of asylum seekers grow, both from those who cross the border irregularly and those who apply when they come as visitors and students, the visa officers, as Mr. Fontaine is talking about, they have ordinary human reactions. They increase refusal rates for all other categories that are coming in temporarily. This is very important for people to understand. Officers are the gatekeepers to Canada, and they see their job as protecting our country from those wanting to enter and make asylum claims. They believe that there are good processes for applying as refugees abroad, and coming to Canada as visitors or walking across a non-controlled border crossing are not some of them. If an officer believes that an applicant for a temporary visa has even the slightest intention of applying for asylum, they will be refused for a visitor visa or a student visa or a work permit. I work with many visa posts around the world, and officers have made this point abundantly clear to me. Also, the greater number of asylum seekers being approved in Canada, the greater number of refusals there will be for temporary visas outside of Canada, students, visitors, and workers. According to the minister's own report, those coming as international students and visitors contribute $32 billion annually to the Canadian economy in 2017. So any increase in refusal rates costs our country billions of dollars a year. The number of student visa refusals has skyrocketed under the current federal government, nearly doubling in many provinces. In fact, in most provinces, it has nearly doubled. The refusal rates have gone from the mid-20s 3 years ago to over 50% in the last 3 years. Our local Manitoba Association wrote to the minister about this. Minister Hussein's response was completely logical. He simply took down the statistics from their website and refused to provide any statistics via ATIP. This is at the same time when Manitoba and most other provinces are looking at international students as a growing source of skilled labor to fill economic needs. It has recently been well documented that visitor visa refusals has also risen dramatically. The official rate is now 26%, but this number vastly underestimates this issue. By the way, I also sit on the board of one of the largest Indian travel agencies, and I'm their Canadian director, and I can talk with some assurance about this. In places like India, getting a U.S. visa is relatively simple. Alternatively, people know that the majority of Indians can't get a visitor visa to Canada, so they simply do not apply. There are millions more visitors who would like to come to Canada, but who know that their visas will be refused, so they don't try. The reason why they will be refused? The officers fear they will make an asylum claim. When we started the Provincial Nominee Program in 1997, the processing time for many years was about 6 months. Over the next 18 years, it slowly grew to about 11 months. That's the federal processing time. Since the new government has taken over, the processing time has quickly escalated to 19 months. In a province like Manitoba, which relies almost entirely on the provincial nominee for increases in skilled labor and population growth, this increase in processing time costs our little province tens of millions of dollars a year. Finally, there's the cost of processing and settling those who make asylum claims in Canada. In my view, this is likely the smallest cost associated with this issue. The other costs, missed opportunities of students and visitors, companies and communities being without skilled workers, are far larger and more critical. Parliament has asked the Parliamentary Budget Office to examine the costs associated with asylum seekers. And I would like to ask this committee to change and amend that request so that the costs associated with refused visitors, refused students, and delays in economic immigrants be added to the costs associated with these claims. There is only one department of IRCC, not two. The department allocates resources as they see fit. In 2017, it allocated resources to process Syrian refugees security screening in 96 hours, down from 30 days. This is at the same time it's taken up to 11 years to screen some family members who are sponsored by their children. 11 years. But it's a stunning number. These are resource allocations made by the government. There are not two departments. They keep repeating that there are two streams. But as one stream goes faster, the other stream goes slower. This is irrefutable. It is also irrefutable that as asylum seekers approvals numbers grow, the refusal of other temporary categories goes up, and goes up substantially. The approval rate of asylum seekers in the United States under the Obama administration was 18%. In the UK, it is 28%. In France, it is 32%. In Canada, under this government, it is now 70% and rising. But even this rate is dramatically understated. Of the 30% who are refused, they have several ways of remaining. Of course, they can appeal. But contrary to what Mr. Vaughan said, the majority, in fact, the vast majority of those crossing irregularly are single men. Many refused applicants simply get married and remain as spouses, while others are unable to be removed due to lack of travel documents or pre-removal risk assessment. There's also humanitarian compassionate grounds, and even some qualify as federal skilled worker. To the best of my knowledge, there has never been any statistics released on the actual number of asylum seekers who are allowed to remain in Canada. Anecdotally, visa officers claim that about half of those who are initially refused are allowed to stay for various reasons, for a total of 85% approval. I'm not aware of any other developed country which allows 85% of asylum seekers to remain. In Canada, regardless of which party you're in or support, we passionately believe in fairness. All of us do. No party has a lock on it. Yet, when it comes to asylum seekers, it is hyperbole, political correctness, and lack of any economic data or analysis that seems to rule. There should be one door to enter Canada, and that is the front door. Thank you.
Thank you to all the witnesses. Mr. Fadjascatos for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Minister, you mentioned a number of estimates at the beginning on costs. I wonder if you could table that to the committee, along with an explanation of how those figures were worked out.
Thanks very much for your question. Also, I just wanted to say thanks you for holding these hearings. I think it was very enlightening for me. Yes, we'll do that for you.
Thank you, Minister.
We're going to be sending a letter off to my 4 or 5 ministerial counterparts in your government.
I don't mean to cut you off, Minister, but I do have limited time, so
No problem.
I do want to get into the questions. The first is on legal issues. You continue to insist, and we heard today, that you're using the word illegal when describing this situation. Can you tell me where in the Canadian Criminal Code does it say that crossing the border to seek asylum is illegal? Now, we did hear the nuance about the Customs Act, but that still recognizes the legal rights of asylum seekers.
So we're using a term that was used by the Federal Minister of Immigration at one point in time.
Excuse me?
The Federal Minister of Immigration used it in committee. I'm not going to get into a debate on semantics. I'm simply here as the Minister responsible for immigration policy in the province of Ontario to let you know that there has been a significant strain on our resources to the tune of almost $200 million. And we're simply asking for support, not only in shelter costs, but in education costs and the social welfare. So I'm also the Minister responsible for social assistance in the province of Ontario, and that is a $90 million cost.
I would submit to you that there are other words that can be used. I worry about a situation, with all due respect, that inflames a situation. I'm from London, Ontario, and we had an incident you might have seen that went viral online. These words create a certain perception of what are almost always very desperate people fleeing desperate circumstances. You spoke in your presentation, you used, as a matter of fact, the word choices in your presentation. Today we heard from lawyers and experts in refugee law that the federal government is in fact legally obligated to ensure that asylum claimants get a hearing to determine if they meet the definition of a refugee. So you can call that a choice, but a legal obligation is a certain kind of choice. I wonder, as the minister responsible for refugee issues in the province of Ontario, are you familiar with the 1985 Singh decision of the Supreme Court, and do you recognize its binding legal implications?
So I'm just going to point out that Ontario receives more immigrants and refugees than any other
Minister,
province
could you stick to the
country.
can you answer the question?
We spend more than $110 million annually to welcome and settle and integrate immigrants and refugees. In addition to that, we spend about $320 million
I appreciate that, Minister, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but there is limited time. I guess the answer to that question is no. Do you recognize the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees and the implications for federal and provincial governments? Furthermore, the fact that provincial governments must recognize and ensure respect for customary international law, and that UN Convention is an example of customary international law. Do you recognize it?
So I'm the minister responsible for immigration policy in the province
But there
of
are
Ontario,
implications
and we
for
have
the
a
province.
$200 million and growing bill
The
that we're
UN
asking the
Convention
federal
does-
government to pay for.
the
You know,
UN
I've been
Convention,
around a
with
long
all due
time,
respect-
12 years. In fact, I must say this, just because they put the paper in front of you doesn't mean you have to
No,
read
I
it.
come up with my own
so
questions, I
I
promise
think
you.
if you'd like to talk to me constructively, like Bill Blair has, then we can have a conversation about the cost build-up in my city of Ottawa and the city of Toronto, in addition to what the welfare costs are for my ministry.
Minister, you're ignoring the question, so that's why I'm engaging in the way that I am. As far as international law goes, yes, the federal government does sign things like it is a signatory to the convention. That's the primary, it's the responsibility of the federal government to do those things, but it does confer certain obligations on the parts of provinces, namely the recognition and the showing of respect to customary international law. Again, the UN Convention is an example of that.
So
I only have a few minutes left, and I want to speak to the mayor as well. So with my final question to you, you've attributed the rise in asylum claimants coming into Canada to Twitter, in fact. 50,000 asylum claimants came to Canada in 2017. You know, if it is Twitter, I wonder if social media holds water with respect to what's happened in France. In 2017, 100,000 individuals claimed asylum in that country. In 2017, again, 220,000 individuals claimed asylum in Germany. And so I wonder, is Twitter responsible for the number of asylum claims in those two countries, or is it the usual factors, war, conflict, and poverty? I think it's important, at least on that issue, let's be on the same page. Because, you know, if Twitter's causing these things, I think we live in it's like alternative universe talk to me.
Okay. So let me just be clear. I'm not the minister responsible for immigration in France. I'm the minister responsible for immigration policy and social assistance.
But you have said things about what
the
caused
federal
this.
government has sole jurisdiction over on Canada's borders, and it is your responsibility to identify and fully fund a solution to this most recent influx. What I'm simply here doing today is letting you know that that is costing my ministry about $200 million at a time where we need to deploy this precious little money that we have to issues like Children's Aid Society.
I look forward to you tabling the documents,
We'll look forward to sending it to you.
we'll take a look at that. And this is a challenge and not a crisis. Let's also put that on the record as
Until
well.
800 people are-
Mayor, thank you very much for appearing via video conference. I know you're a very busy man. I've seen you in Chatham as well, and I know that your economy is firing on all cylinders. 2008, you had 15.8% unemployment, if I'm not mistaken. Now it's down to 5.6 or 5.7%. For me, the way you describe this challenge, it's an opportunity for you. That's what I'm hearing. You know, and you have a number of gaps as far as employment goes. You're looking for individuals to fill skill shortages in the community of Chatham-Kent. Could you speak to that and the opportunity that does in fact exist here from your point of view?
Well, the opportunity, we see this crisis that everybody refers to it as an opportunity for my community. You're right, to the member from London North Centre, is that, you know, we had a huge unemployment rate. We've been successful at generating new investments into our community. We've been supporting companies with the government's, federal and provincial government support of helping these companies grow. Now we're into a situation where our unemployment, when you have a low unemployment rate and you've got companies that want to expand, we don't have people. And people is the key resources. When I talked to the Mayor, John Tory, and I says, you know, one of the important pieces of information we need is the skill sets of these individuals. Because, like I said, Peter, you were down, and I showed you that we were showing about the job opportunities that are available. And if we understood the skill sets of individuals and show those skill sets to employers, we could almost probably do pre-interview processes where we could put people to gainful employment.
I appreciate the positive way you've approached this issue, Mayor.
Yeah, there will be a need for the transferring, okay, supporting Toronto and help us, because I indicated to you, is that we have a short, we only have 43 people per square kilometer. Municipal tax bases are short, where we need assistance during that time frame. But if we can get these individuals into gainful employment, which supports our local employers, which gives them a talent base that they never had, and I've seen some of the talent base that is actually being displayed.
I'm afraid I need to cut you off, Your Worship. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rempel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just while I have the floor, I just want to put on the record, because my colleague opposite looks slightly surprised when we quoted the Minister of Immigration. And at our committee meeting in March, he stated, I have used the word illegal and I've used the word irregular, and I think both are accurate. So I'll look forward to reading the blues and some of his comments that he made and then applying them in the context of the comment that his minister made. But I digress. Minister MacLeod, here we are. The reality is, when we look at immigration, I don't think there's a single person in this room, and that's a beautiful thing about Canada, that asks if immigration, it's how. And the reality is that when we accept humanitarian immigration, it's not just about processing them at a border. It's not just about accepting them or signing off on a selection process from the UNHCR. It's about a long-term commitment to their well-being and their integration into the social and economic fabric of Canada. And that costs money, and it takes planning. And the reality is that provinces bear the burden of a lot of this work because of the scope of jurisdiction in terms of provision of education, healthcare, subsidized housing. Part of the difficulty that we've had as a committee is getting information from the government to understand the needs of this cohort, because we really don't have a sense of who's coming in. Has the government given you any projections or information on what to expect in the next year and the needs associated with housing, language training, long-term integration, social welfare payments? Do you have any of that information?
No, the federal government has not provided us with any indication of how many new refugee claimants Ontario will be receiving over the next 18 months, but we do know from the federal government's refugee claimant data that from January 2017 to May 2018, Ontario received 5,585 refugee claimants who made their claim in Quebec and then moved to Ontario. Between January and May of 2018, 21.4% or 1,675 of all refugee claimants were children under the age of 15. And we have asked, and we would like the federal government to be more specific on the information and the profile of claimants coming from the Quebec border, such as data on education and skills levels. This data can support service planning and costing in terms of language training as well as other initiatives. And I think it's as we look at this, and I have a very large ministry, one of the concerns we have as the bills start to pile up is where do you take that money from? I'm responsible for women who are escaping trafficking or domestic violence, the Children's Aid Society, for example, the youth justice system, as you know, social assistance, but also Ontario Disability and Supports, children with autism. That's what keeps me up at night, and that's why I think, given the situation, and we can go down rabbit holes on terms, and we can get into semantics, but I don't think that's the debate we should be having. We should be having a debate on how we can, how the federal government can fully fund this situation, so that we can make Ontario whole and our municipalities.
In terms of your planning, you alluded to the fact that the government has made a decision to at this point in time, not seek to apply the Safe Third Country Agreement to the entire Canadian border. I would assert that has signaled a significant policy change, and that, as the Parliamentary Secretary to ESDC just sort of stated, this is the new normal. Ontario's in a severe deficit situation right now, and you just talked about choices. What do those choices look like?
Okay, so our new government announced just last week that we'll be doing line-by-line audits because there has been a major dispute between the previous administration, as well as the Financial Accountability Officer and the Auditor General. We could be facing a deficit anywhere between $12 billion to $20 billion, or maybe more, I don't know. So in the next 2 months, we'll figure that out. I can tell you, running one of the largest government departments in the province of Ontario, that we will have to make choices. And when we look at our budget and the fact that we are in a significant deficit situation, our priorities are for children in my ministry who are suffering from autism, for example, and the Children's Aid Society, Youth in Care, and Custody. And so these are areas that we worry about.
I'm just going to ask my colleague to shut his volume off. And look, I mean, we don't want to talk about choices. Those are tough things to talk about because there are finite resources. And it's incumbent upon all of us to discuss how we prioritize and make choices and also treat people with dignity and compassion. Now, we have been asking for information for this for some time and the government to come up with a plan. And what has concerned me is that rather than focusing on the how and the data that we need to get to the how, the last couple of weeks we've seen a lot of name calling, specifically to you. I mean, I've heard the term alt-right and un-Canadian used for you. It's not a laughing matter.
It's hard to call somebody like that.
Very briefly,
they're
like in just a minute. How did that, like, is that going to help? Like, we might have different political stripes here, but you don't have to like someone to work with them. Has that actually helped provincial relationships in planning for the 800 people that are about to be evicted from a homeless shelter or a college dormitory?
So we do have an emerging issue. It is a crisis of where we're going to house 800 people in Toronto that are right now in 2 college dormitories. But let me just say this. I grew up in a small town called New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. I went to St. FX, and we had a saying there: you don't necessarily have to accept, but you must respect other people's points of view. So I think what shocked me as a new minister a week into the job was the escalation of some rhetoric. But I will say this, and I was very pleased to have the opportunity on 2 occasions in the last week to speak with new Minister Bill Blair, and I'm looking forward to a collaborative relationship with him and the change in tone and style.
Thank you. If we can find out what his job is, Minister, we are still working on that.
Okay.
We are on the hunt. We will keep you apprised of our efforts. Mr. Chair, with the time that I have left, I would move that in relation to the committee's study on the impact of irregular border crossing of Canada's southern border, that the committee report its finding to the House and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response. Mr. Chair, we haven't clarified the result of these meetings. And given that there are some fairly significant points that have come up over the last several hours of testimony, including that the government intends to provide additional payments, we don't know how much or when or what that's projected on. I think it's important for us to summarize the findings of this committee, especially, tabling the motion this morning on the cost. So I would ask, Mr. Chair, that this committee actually put together a formal report based on the testimony that we've heard here, because I think that the role of this committee should be to, even if we can't agree on how, point out to the government that there are some gaps in information that are preventing the public, members of the media, our provincial counterparts from coming up with policy and planning. And I would argue and assert that it is our role as parliamentarians to help to define and assess whether or not government expenditures are appropriate. Don't think we're there yet, but I would be very surprised if my Liberal colleagues would not support the tabling of a report in the House of Commons. To me, a vote against this is really a vote against having a plan. And I would really, really like our committee to support tabling a plan in the House of Commons and asking the government to report its findings to the House as soon as possible.
So there is a motion now on the floor that in relation to the committee study on the impact of irregular crossing of Canada's southern border, that the committee report its findings to the House and request a government response. Is that a fair summary of it? Mr. Whalen.
Move to adjourn debate.
There is a motion then to adjourn debate on that motion. It's not debatable. All in favor? Opposed? That there's only 3 votes on the Conservative side, just to remind. One of you can't vote. Not sure who you decide, but that motion is passed. So we adjourn debate on that motion.
I believe I still have about 30 seconds left.
You have 12 seconds.
Thank you. Minister, would you have liked to have seen this committee provide a report on this particular issue after appearing here and hearing all of these witnesses and their testimony?
Yeah, the witnesses have been outstanding. I would look forward to seeing that if it was made available.
It's unfortunate,
But
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's too bad.
Quite. Thank you.
Very much. My speakers list. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the minister and all the witnesses that are here before us. I think it was unfortunate for the Liberal members to adjourn the debate on simply calling for the committee after this study to table a report and to get a response from the government. I think we're in this situation of having a summer session, emergency sitting, if you will, on this issue, because the Liberals actually on 5 occasions last year voted to adjourn my motion to call for a study on this very issue. Had we done that, we might not be having this conversation today. Had we done that, we might actually have a real plan in place. Had we done that, we might not be saddled with the challenge that we're faced with to the degree that we are. And I do think it's unfortunate. Hiding yourself, sticking your head in the sand is not going to solve the issue. And simply reading from your talking points to say you have a plan doesn't mean that you actually have a plan. And so I do think it's unfortunate. So I would have supported that motion, but adjournment of debate on that very motion was made prior to even my getting on the floor to speak to it, and I think that's too bad. Now, I do want to turn to this issue with you, Minister MacLeod. You mentioned that you're simply using the word illegal because the Minister of Immigration used that word. And you're correct. The Minister of Immigration on March 19th, I believe, used the word illegal to describe asylum seekers. In fact, he says both words are accurate, and he uses those terms illegal and irregular interchangeably. And in fact, the Prime Minister himself in question period on April 25th used the word illegal as well. I think they're wrong. The Immigration Refugee Protection Act clearly states when a person crosses over to the border, directly or indirectly, for the purposes of seeking asylum, they're not committing a criminal offense. The Act actually states that very clearly. So my question to you, Minister MacLeod, is this. If the Minister of Immigration admits that he was wrong, will you also stop using this word and admit that you're wrong as well?
Well, thanks very much for the question. Also, thank you for your leadership along with MP Rempel in making sure that these committee hearings were taking place and that I had the opportunity to come here and speak on behalf of Ontario. Look, many people have used many different terms. The minister himself has used irregular, illegal. The new Minister for Border Services used unlawful the other day on Metro Morning. But I'm not going to get into a debate on semantics and what we're calling them. We can agree to disagree on language, but I think what we all must agree on is what the First Ministers came out with on Friday, which is that the federal government has created this issue.
Thank you. I'm going to pause here because time is of the essence. It's not just semantics. It is the law. The law actually states when a person comes to Canada under immigration, for the purposes of immigration, under IRPA, when they cross over to Canada in a irregular point of entry, they are not committing an offense. That is the law. So it's not just semantics. It's very important to actually get the language right and correct. And I am going to make every effort to get the Minister of Immigration to admit that he's wrong so that we can set the record straight once and for all and stop casting the kind of aspersions that are being casted against asylum seekers by calling them illegal. I'm going to move on to another question here with respect to a plan. We've been talking about plan, and one of the issues, of course, is the need to admit that the Safe Third Country Agreement is causing people to cross over irregularly in substantial numbers. And that's created, I think, disorder, if you will, for border communities particularly. So the plan would need to incorporate an action with respect to that, and that would be to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement. Now, the immigration levels plan actually has a stream for protected persons, and the target for 2018 is 16,000. That number has already been exceeded, of course. And so my question to you, Mr. Fortin, is this. For the purposes of the staff, in terms of planning for CBSA staff, for IRB staff, for RCMP staff, and so on, doing the work that your members do each and every day, would it not be better for the government to establish a plan by adjusting the immigration levels number to more accurately reflect the reality of what we're faced with today? We knew, I think, that since January of 2017, since the Trump administration formed office, that these numbers were going to increase significantly. And we're seeing that. We knew it then, and we know it now. So would you support the call for the government to adjust the immigration levels plan for the protected person stream to increase the number, to double that number, to more accurately reflect the reality that we're faced with today?
Part of the plan that the government had put in place, and that's where we do disagree, I would say not the government, but more the CBSA, is they're having created an amount of officers who volunteer to actually be deployed at Roxham Road or Lacolle to help with that situation. The problem is the volunteers are coming from the offices, which is all their very tight with their resources. So it will create, if tomorrow morning, to answer your question very directly, we would triple that amount of asylum seekers coming across, we would be in trouble. And that's the way we had voiced our concern with the level of resourcing that we're having right now.
Right, so precisely, if you adjust the levels plan targets in anticipating a greater number, then that would mean that you would have to adjust the resources accordingly, not rob Peter to pay Paul, but rather to increase the staffing for CBSA, to increase the staffing for RCMP, to increase the staffing for IRCC, and equally important, to increase the resources at the IRB so that these cases can be processed expeditiously and so that we can actually get on with dealing with the issue effectively. Would that not be required as part of the plan?
Yes, that would be required. And right now, we as I said, it's being contained. But the problem is we're forecasting over 200,000 people in the United States, who are on those TPS permit, which they will be ending with two choices, either to leave back in their country or to try to come in Canada. And we suspect that they would be taking the second option.
It remains to be seen what will happen, but right now people are coming through, and then there are pressures created for the border communities. If the government adjusted the numbers to reflect what we've seen last year, by doubling the protected persons numbers, I think would be more equipped to deal with the situation. And of course, we've had a chronic problem with the IRB of underfunding. From the conservatives to the liberals, this has been a chronic problem and continue to persist. And so if we actually funded them properly, we may not be faced with the kind of challenges that we're faced with today. Minister MacLeod, you also mentioned about
I'm
processing.
afraid I do need to end you there. You got an extra 30 seconds. Very good. We have a few. I'm just going to extend the meeting a few minutes, unless there's unanimous consent to adjourn. But Mr. Fraser, if you have just a couple of minutes, then you could close.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. In the limited time I have, Ms. MacLeod, first, congratulations on your appointment as a fellow Pictou County native and St. FX graduate. It's a pleasure to see you here today. One of the things I just want to touch on, and this is as much as a plea as it is a question, you've described, I think, in an innocent way, the use of the terms illegals as simply being semantics. The fact is, as Ms. Kwan pointed out, it is a matter of law, but it's also very important to recognize that words very, very much do matter. When we refer to people as illegals or queue jumpers, when we talk about there being a crisis, when the evidence we hear is actually that there's a well-managed response to this challenge, what it does is it creates a second class of human being that's living within our borders today, and that is not something that I'm okay with. One of the things that we have to be very careful about is the warning we received from the representative from the UN today, who said that this kind of language could be populist rhetoric and that it can dehumanize asylum seekers. I don't think that you do this, use this language maliciously. As I said, I think it's innocently held.
Order, Mr. Chair.
One of the things that I think we really have to be careful about is that we need not.
I seek unanimous consent from the committee to table the blues from the March 19th meeting where the immigration minister under this federal government said that he used the terms interchangeably and illegally. Just, it might help my colleagues' comments.
Unanimous consent to present the blues. I believe, if I just want to check, the blues no longer exist after the, do they?
Apologies, I'll clarify.
It's the record of
The
proceedings,
Hansard.
the
Yeah, the
actual
record of-
minutes of the meeting,
Right.
where the blues
Yes,
disappear.
indeed.
Do they not?
Yes.
They're
The record of
replaced
proceedings, my
by the record of
apologies.
proceedings, which are public
Yes.
document.
Yes, just, but they might be helpful.
Is there unanimous consent to? Sure. Thank you.
May I continue, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Fraser, you may continue.
Regardless of what specifics we're using in a different context, the real point I'm trying to make is that it's not asylum seekers that are crossing borders that we need to fear. It's the ideas and the potential for discrimination that are invading our politics that I am most concerned about. I wanted to take this chance. Having been a St. FX grad, you may appreciate, Minister, there's a very inspirational story about a newcomer family, the Haddad, who are making chocolate in Antigonish. My friend Tara Haddad posted not long ago on Facebook, I'm so sad how Ontario government is acting against the real Canadian values of openness and welcome by spreading hatred that impacts directly the most vulnerable group of asylum seekers. No one was born to immigrate, but if they are forced to leave their home, let's show them some kindness. Hashtag kindness matters. This is the impact, intended or not, that some of the language being used, not just by you, but people across the political spectrum are using. We need to be careful. My request for you is when you get back to Queen's Park, to have a conversation with your colleagues, and I'll undertake to do the same with mine, that we be careful in our choice of language because words matter and it's causing a real impact for the people that live and work in my riding.
So I don't agree with the characterization whatsoever. I do look forward to going to New Glasgow, Nova Scotia next week for my 25-year high school reunion and to give a speech to the Pictou County Chamber of Commerce. And the rural values that I grew up on extended well and have served me extremely well in the nation's capital for the past 5 elections, where I've served with Minister Poilievre, or the former Minister Poilievre, an MP in Carleton, which is one of the most diverse ridings in all of Ontario, which welcomes not only immigrants from around the world, in particular from China and from India, but has welcomed a number of Syrian refugees. And so I really disagree with your characterization. In fact, I think when you do this and you suggest this, you're actually contributing to more of the negative tone in this debate. This is a very emotional debate for many people. I'm simply here today as the minister responsible for a number of different former ministries in the province of Ontario. I have a $200 million price tag that I need you guys to pay for. And you would rather have a debate on words. I would rather have a debate on making sure that I can fund my ministry and the programs that I'm responsible for, and that is children and youth, children in care, children in the justice system, children with autism. It is the Ontario Disability Supports. It is Ontario Works, women escaping trafficking, women escaping domestic violence. It is a plan to eradicate poverty in the province of Ontario. So that is who I'm standing up for all of the people in this province, in the province of Ontario, who rely on my ministry for the services that my ministry delivers. And so I'm here today indicating that there is a $200 million price tag that your government needs to pick up. And that's why I accepted the invitation. That's why I am here. I'm very happy to be back in the nation's capital. I live 20 minutes away. But I have issues with the federal government making policy choices and then expecting the municipalities of Ontario and the province of Ontario to pay for those. So I would just encourage all of you to understand that there are severe constraints on the province of Ontario, and we are simply asking to be made whole. You can have a debate on the dictionary and the thesaurus, and I'd be happy to, let you do that. I have a job to do, and I have very vulnerable people who rely on me to do that job. And so I'm
I
going to
support
continue to
the
do that.
causes you're pursuing. I believe they're noble. I want you guys to be able to come to the table with us to help work on this problem because, as we learned through earlier panels, this is one of shared jurisdiction, and we're looking for a partner, and I hope and trust that we'll be able to work with the Ontario government.
I am going to continue to do what all First Ministers did last week.
At that point. We have 5 minutes. We're going to adjourn. 20 minutes.